Okay. Okay, so today we're going to be covering the entire range of process of the OFM submissions. That's going to include how incidents are flagged to be sent to the OFM, how to determine things like response type, how to set your department and location codes, what to do when you're reporting mutual aid calls. We're also going to talk about how FirePro validates incidents for submission, and then we're going to walk through the process of creating OFM submission files, how to use things like the cutoff date for submission, resubmitting files to the OFM, and a couple different ways that you can send the files either through FirePro directly or manually to the OFM. We'll also talk about how to resubmit any incidents if you need to, and how FirePro automates that process. So if there's anything there that I don't cover, let me know, and we'll make sure we talk about that. So the first thing that we want to talk about in the context of OFM submissions is when an incident is created in FirePro. If the incident's created through the CAD import process, or if it's created manually by just using the new incident function, the incident will not automatically be flagged as something that needs to get sent to the OFM. But as soon as you select a response type, the software will automatically queue that incident up to be sent to the OFM. Currently, the situation is that all of the standard incident response types are required to be sent to the OFM. If you add new response types to the response type list, those will not automatically be queued to be sent. And probably you wouldn't want to send them anyway because the OFM only accepts the standard response types on the list. What will also happen when you set a response type is that FirePro will check to see if there's any additional information that needs to get filled out and sent to the OFM. And if there is additional forms, those forms will be populated in the More Info tab. There's also a check which looks at the occupancy code that you pick. Now, occupancy code for most incidents is optional, but for fire type calls, the occupancy code is mandatory. And that's because there are slightly different reporting forms for a vehicle type occupancy, a vehicle fire type occupancy versus a structure or outdoor fire type occupancy. So, for example, if I pick one of the motor vehicle accident response or occupancy types here, what will happen is that I get a slightly different OFM tab or More Info tab that includes a vehicles tab with insurance information and a slightly different set of fire details. So it's really important when you're reporting a fire to make sure that you have the active occupancy codes. Now, another thing that you want to think about when you're filling out your reporting information here is that when you are documenting response type, you want to be setting the response type that the call was, not the response type that you were called out for. We maintain a separate drop-down list called the called in as response type, which is normally populated with information from dispatch if you have a CAD integration, or something that you can populate yourself. But the called in as list is intended to let you document what the page out was for, whereas the response type is intended to document what the call out actually was from your perspective. It's also important to note, I probably should have done this a little earlier, but it's also important to note that I am not the OFM. I am only speaking based on the many years I've been helping departments do this process. If you do have specific questions related to how or why you're doing some of this OFM reporting, contacting the OFM directly is definitely your way to go. I can help you with how to do it through FirePro, but I can't really give you super detailed direction on a lot of the nuts and bolts of the response type codes and things like that. So, but generally speaking, you want to set the response type to what the call was. The only exception to that rule is when you're doing mutual aid of any type, going to assist another fire department, then you're going to be using the assisting other fire department response types. These have a slightly different set of validation requirements to them. So making sure you want to use those when you're doing those mutual aids, because the department that you're assisting is responsible for doing the fire reporting to the OFM. That's not your responsibility there. So you just want to put in as assisting other fire department mutual aid. And what we can see is the more info tab goes away, and there's a lot less in the way of reporting requirements for those types of calls. We'll talk a little bit about some of the other reporting things that you want to do with the mutual aid calls in a second. But what's going to happen as soon as you save an incident with one of the response types is that there's a tab here called Author Stats. And this is going to track information about whether this incident is flagged to be sent to the OFM, when it was put into a transfer file to be sent, and also whether it's currently on the transfer list. So what we can see with this incident now, I have set a response type. So in the author status tab, the transferred tick box has been turned on. This is basically pretty automated, so it's not normally something that you need to worry about too much. But this is what indicates to FirePro that this is an incident that needs to get sent to the OFM the next time you run a transfer. So this is kind of the primary way that we're determining, does this incident need to be sent? What we can also do, if we want to, is we can use the search parameter on the incident list window called to be transmitted. And this is actually going to let us see a list of any incident that needs to be sent to the OFM, but has not yet been sent to them, at least according to Fire. So what I can do here is I can set a cutoff date. What I'll just do is do a 12/4/20 cutoff date. And it will show me, this search function will show me every incident that is flagged that needs to be sent to the OFM that has occurred on or before the cutoff date. Normally, we're looking at the end of quarter for most cutoff dates, but you can use it in any context that you want. So this gives you a list of any incident that is queued to be sent. These incidents are also color-coded when they're on the list based on their validation or their completion. So if I look at an incident on this list, which is queued to be sent, I will see 3 different colors on this list. I'll just minimize my search parameters so I can look at the colors. So the first color I'm going to be seeing usually is red. Red on this list means this incident needs to be sent to the OFM, but it is not complete from a validation perspective. From the perspective of, have you filled out all the information that you need to submit it to the province? A red incident, the answer is no. You'll also see that when you open the incident itself, there is a red flag in the top right-hand corner. The red flag indicates that the incident is not yet validated from a provincial perspective. You can check what information you need to fill out on any call by just going to the validation tab of that incident, and it's going to show you a list of all the things that you need to fill out in order to send to the OFM. One of the things that we might note here is that the OFM has asked that we try to encourage departments to send the postal code of an address where the incident occurs, but it is not, strictly speaking, mandatory to do that. So we show postal code on the validation. We flag it as department level validation because it's not actually mandatory for the OFM, although they do encourage it. We can also see we've got a variety of other fields, more information, dollar loss, estimated distance, which need to get filled out before this incident is going to be valid. If you need to double check where any of these fields are, you just double click on the item, and it will bring you right to that location in the FirePro form, so you can see where that is. So the next color that you might see, and these are relatively rare, but in this case, we can see a yellow or green, depending on your monitor's color situation. When I open that incident, it shows as a yellow flag in the top right-hand corner. This means that the incident is complete from an OFM submission perspective, so you could submit it to the province, but there are some department level rules which have been set in FirePro's custom settings, which haven't been filled out. So the incident, you can still submit if it's yellow flagged. It just means that there's some department level rules that they'd like you to encourage to fill out on an incident. And then finally, we have an incident that show in black. So an incident in black, which also shows green on the validation flag, this indicates that the incident is ready to be sent to the OFM. We do not allow you to send submission sets to the OFM that have incomplete incidents in it. That's just to save everybody time, because they're just going to kick them back to you anyway. So it's easier to just make sure that the incidents are completed, the validation is clear before we allow you to send them to the OFM. There's a bunch of automated searching and validation built into the process of creating the submission. So it should be very hard to do, but we'll talk through kind of how that process works. Now, whenever we send incidents to the OFM, any department in the province that sends incidents to the OFM, you're providing the OFM with two different codes related to your fire department. You're sending them a fire department code, which indicates who are we, and you're sending a location code, which indicates where you are physically doing this call. So when I look on any individual incident, by default, that incident is going to be submitted under your department code. Your department code can be found in the setup menu under system information, and that's in this area called response location code right down here. So this is going to be your department response location code. This can be, it's normally 4 digits, but it can be up to 6 depending on your specific areas. In some FirePro systems, there are multiple fire departments operating in the same FirePro system. In that case, if the departments have different location or different station codes, in the setup menu under station names, there's the ability to set department or station specific response location codes. Generally, that's something we've already set up with you as part of your FirePro configuration, but just so you're aware, this is where all that information comes from. Right? This is your department code, which is one of the 2 codes that's being submitted to the province. The second code that you're sending to the province with every incident is the location code. And the location code is intended to indicate where was I physically when this incident occurred. The standard response location code is going to include your own department code, which indicates your area, your fire response area. And generally we set that as the default because most calls for most departments occur within their own response area. That's definitely the most common type of call. However, many departments across the province have aid agreements of various different stripes, and as a result end up going into other departments' response areas. So in that scenario, I'll just put in a second one here. So in that scenario, you could provide an additional response location. However, when you do this, there's some stuff built into FirePro to prevent incorrect response locations from being sent. So the main thing we want to think about is that the only time we would normally use a response location code, which was not our primary, is when you're dealing with one of the assisting other fire department response types. So in fact, if you select one of the assisting other fire department response types, one of the things that'll happen fairly quickly is that there's a couple of pieces of information that have to be set differently. So the first one is you're not going to be able to submit this, these response types if you have your own response location code set. You have to switch it to a different response location. The other thing that you have to do in this such situation is in the mutual aid tab, you have to also identify what kind of mutual aid agreement you're operating. Don't ask me why there's 2 things you have to do here. I didn't make this up. So in this case, we would say that this was mutual aid. And if we saved this incident, now, once again, we can see it passes validation. I should also point out that if other departments are coming to assist you on a mutual aid basis, you can use this aid to from other departments and indicate that they provided aid under, say, an automatic aid agreement, but you're not responsible for any of the reporting for that department. They'll be filling out their own 910 or something like that form. But this is an area where you have to be a little bit careful and pay attention to your response location codes. So two pieces of information that are going to get sent, station or department location code and the response location code. If you're running into any problems with that, book a time, we'll sit down, make sure your system's configured appropriately. I should point out that some of these drop-down lists are only editable by the FirePro administration account. Generally, we try to make it so it's a little harder to submit stuff, to make changes to stuff that relates to OFM submissions. It's not something that should get changed very often. Okay, so at a certain point, you have ideally validated a set of incidents, and you're getting to a point where you're ready. And let's just double check here. Yeah, okay. You're getting to a point where you're ready to submit incidents to the province. And normally the process for doing that is that you can just use this little gold icon up at the top of the screen to create your OFM transmission files. So if I select this icon, it's going to ask me for a cutoff date. So what we're looking at here is the end date for the time period that you want to run the submission for. Normally, that's going to be the end of the previous month or the end of the previous quarter for your cutoff date. FirePro is going to take every incident that's flagged for submission on or before this date and package it up in the submission file. This is important to point out because this is something that we want to consider in a little bit when I talk to you more about how resubmission works as a general rule. So in this case, I'm just going to quickly look down here and simplify. So what I'll do is I'm going to select and say 12/4/20 because I know I've got some valid incidents here. And so if I actually have incidents in my submission set that are not valid, I'm going to get an immediate message as soon as I hit OK. Right? It's going to give me a message says some incidents are incomplete. Fix those errors. So it'll just show me of the incidents that I wanted to submit. Here's a list of the ones that are incomplete. Ideally, I will just complete those, fix them up, and then I can hit this OFM transmission files button again. And once all the incidents in my submission set are valid, I can hit OK. And it's going to ask me, first of all, it's going to display the incidents here that you're going to be submitting. And then it will ask you if you want to create the files. I'm going to say yes. So whenever we are generating files for the OFM, FirePro generates two different files for OFM submission. And I'll just quickly generate those files. And we'll take a look at those in just one second. Once I've generated the files and saved them on my computer, you want to save them in a place that you can find again easily. It's going to ask you if you want to mark the records as sent. You should normally hit yes here unless you're doing a test creation or something like that. So if I hit yes, what's going to happen is I'll get a message that shows where the files to the OFM are created and what they're called. Every time you create files to send to the province, FirePro will create a StinRep file and an injury file. The StinRep file contains all the incident information. I don't know why it's called StinRep. You'd have to ask them. And the injury file contains any injury information if you've had a firefighter injury. So in this case, I put them in the downloads folder. And we'll talk about automatically sending to the OFM in just a sec. So let's go into our downloads folder here. So in our downloads, we now have an injury and a StinRep file. These files are not intended to be read by humans. They are computer files. If you're really desperate to squint at a screen, you can open them up and see this. This is what the OFM gets when you send off a file to them. It is very common for the injury file to be a 0K empty file. The OFM would like that file even if it is blank. So it's usually included in all the submission packages. Now, one way that I could submit this to the OFM right now, if I wanted to, is I could just open up a new email. Do that here. Let's do so I could open up a new email. I could send this to OFM statistics at ontario.ca. Look at that, it's in my quick set. Put in a little bit of information about the date range and attach those two files to this incident. And if I have to do a manual drag and drop to put the 0K file in here, but this will go ahead and allow you to send these incidents directly to the OFM. The other option that you have for incident submission is you can send the incidents directly from Firefly. In order to do that, you have to have the email function set up in the system. That's a whole nother training seminar about that one. But if you do have it set up, then you can, when this message pops up, you can just hit yes, and the program will automatically attach the incidents or the submission files to an email and email it to the OFM. You can also print a submission summary as part of that process, which will give you a list of all the incidents that were included in the submission. Now, when I look at incidents, I'll just do a quick search for older incidents here so we can see it. Actually, that might be more than the last 36 months. So anytime I have created an incident and sent it to the OFM, it is going to generate a transfer date on that incident report. And if I look under the author status tab, the transfer flag will be turned off. So it's basically saying this incident has been sent, it was included in a transfer. If your FirePro is not set up to email the OFM automatically, and you don't get that prompt when you send the submission, all this date transferred means is this is the date that we put the submission into a file for you to send to the OFM. It doesn't actually check if you actually sent it. So the issue in that scenario is that this might show that the file was created, but if it was never emailed to the OFM afterwards, it will mean that the OFM does not have it. But don't worry, because there are ways to reflag these incidents for submission and resend them to the OFM. The easiest way to do that is you can just turn on the transfer flag yourself manually. That is really simple, really fast, not great if you have an entire month of incidents to resend. Another way that you can resend incidents to the OFM is that if, say, the OFM has gotten back to you and they've said, there's some codes in here that we don't think are right, you should change those. If you go in and change some of those codes or change some of the times on an incident, for example, you will automatically get a message that asks if you want to resend the report to the OFM. Generally, if this message pops up, the answer is normally yes, you do. It means that this is a reportable field on a reportable call that you have changed. So I'll hit yes. At that point, what's happened is that once again, the transfer flag has been turned on and this incident has been queued up to be sent. What this also means is that if you do another submission, say for the current quarter that you're working on, this older incident will automatically be included in it. So you don't have to do anything else to resubmit. It'll just automatically be added to the next submission set that you send. That's all you have to do. The final way that you can resubmit incidents to the OFM, say, for example, there was incidents from last year had all showed as being transferred, but the OFM saying they don't have them, then the simple way to do that is to go to the maintenance menu and go to the option called data updates. And right at the top, there's two options related to OFM submissions. There's the remove incidents from next electronic transmission, not what we want to do right now. And there's the add incidents to next electronic transmission. This is the batch tool that will re-add incidents to the OFM submission. So even if they're flagged as transferred, you can resend them. So I'm going to say yes here. Now, I have a couple different ways that I can resend flag the incidents for resubmission. The standard one is by incident date. I could just say flag everything from last year to be sent to the OFM. It's important to point out that it does not cause any problems from an OFM reporting perspective if you resubmit incidents that you've already submitted once. As long as you're submitting the same information or an updated version of the same information, it will not cause any problems for you to do that. Obviously, it's nicest to just submit the ones you need to, but it's not going to break anything if you accidentally submit some stuff that you've already submitted in the past. Another option here is that I can resubmit by transfer date. So in this case, I would be saying flag every incident that I sent to the OFM or flagged having been sent to the OFM last year. This can be nice if I did a transfer last week and it needs to get resubmitted. I could just say, anything that was flagged for transfer this month gets, but incident date's the most common way to do that. So I can just say by incident date, it'll go through, find any report that was flagged as having been sent already and reflag it to be resent on the next submission. So if you're trying to run a submission and you're getting a message that says there's no incidents to be submitted in this time period, possibly the resubmit option is what you want to do. So now when I look at any incident from the previous year, it's going to show that that incident is flagged to be sent to the OFM. It's important also to note that this is not going to delete a transfer date. It will still show the most recent date that the transfer was done, but it will flag it so that you can send it in the next transfer. And that, in that case, we'd be just doing the standard process of creating OFM transmission files. So see if we want to do anything else in here. That's basically the gist of it. Now, normally when you send an email submission to the OFM, you can expect to be able to check on those within 3 to 5 business days, tends to be processing time. And they will normally send you back a report if there's any problems or an end of year report to check. I should also point out, this is something that people have run into in the past, that because the OFM files always have the same name, it's usually not best practice to recreate them in the same location every time, because the new files will replace the old files. They have exactly the same name. So generally, if I'm filing my OFM submission files, I'll put them in subfolders by date. Right? I'll do something like create a new folder here. I'd have a new folder for OFM submissions. And then in my OFM submissions, I would either do it by date range or by date. So I could either do a Q1 2024 folder, or you could do a March 11th or whatever date. Then put the StimRep files in here. Don't recreate files in the individual folders because that will replace them and you won't be able to reference them. That being said, you can always go in and recreate the submission files from FirePro, usually by going into your data updates, flagging incidents to be resubmitted, and then just walking through the same submission process over again. So you can recreate these files anytime you want if you need to.